The diplomatic vessel shuddered violently as it tumbled through space. Junho gripped the edge of his medical station, his knuckles white against the metal surface. Alarms screamed throughout the ship, and the lights flickered between bright white and emergency red. He could hear Captain Reynolds shouting orders from the bridge, but the words were lost in the chaos of grinding metal and explosive decompression alerts. They had been on a routine mission to establish first contact protocols with the Valtharian Empire, one of the most powerful civilizations in this sector of the galaxy. Everything had gone smoothly until they encountered the spatial anomaly. The sensors hadn't detected it until it was too late. Now their ship was caught in its grip, being pulled inexorably toward the planet below. Junho watched through the viewport as the world grew larger. He could see massive structures on the surface, towers that reached toward the sky like fingers of glass and steel. The capital city of the Valtharian Empire spread across the landscape like a jewel, glittering in the light of twin stars. It would have been beautiful under different circumstances. Right now, it looked like their grave. The ship broke through the atmosphere with a sound like thunder. The hull began to glow red from the friction, and Junho could feel the heat even through the reinforced walls of the medical bay. He strapped himself into his chair and held on as the vessel spun out of control. Through the viewport, he caught glimpses of the city rushing up to meet them. They were going to crash directly into what looked like the palace complex. The impact came like the fist of an angry god. Metal shrieked and tore. Junho was thrown against his restraints hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. The ship skidded across polished stone, carving a deep gouge through what had been an ornate plaza. When everything finally stopped moving, the silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. Junho unbuckled with shaking hands and assessed himself. Bruised, battered, but nothing broken. He grabbed his medical kit and stumbled toward the bridge. Around him, the ship groaned and settled. Small fires burned in exposed panels, and the acrid smell of melted plastic filled the air. He found the captain unconscious but alive, along with most of the crew. He worked quickly, stabilizing injuries and distributing emergency oxygen masks. They had perhaps an hour before the ship's life support failed completely. Through the cracked viewport, he could see they had landed in the middle of some kind of celebration. Thousands of alien beings in elaborate clothing fled from the crashed vessel, their panic visible even from inside. Then the soldiers came. They were tall, these Valtharanes, with skin that shimmered like mother of pearl and eyes that held depths of violet and gold. They wore armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal, and they carried weapons that hummed with barely contained energy. They surrounded the ship in minutes, their formation precise and professional. When they breached the hull, Junho and the conscious crew members raised their hands in surrender. There was no point in fighting. They were injured, their ship was destroyed, and they were vastly outnumbered on an alien world. The soldiers herded them out into the open air, and Junho got his first real look at where they had crashed. The palace was enormous, a structure that defied human engineering with its impossible angles and gravity-defying architecture. The plaza where they had landed was decorated for some kind of festival, now ruined by their violent arrival. Banners lay torn and burning. Elaborate food displays were scattered across the stones. In the distance, he could hear something that sounded like music, but also like mourning. The Valtharanes kept the humans under guard in a large chamber that might have been beautiful if Junho had been in any state to appreciate it. The walls were made of some translucent material that caught the light and scattered it into rainbow patterns. His crew huddled together, frightened and injured. Captain Reynolds had regained consciousness but was clearly concussed. Junho did what he could with his limited supplies. Hours passed. The Valtharanes brought them water that tasted strange but was drinkable, and food that most of the crew was too scared to eat. Junho tried a little, knowing they would need their strength. It wasn't bad, actually, though the texture was unusual. It was late in what he assumed was their night cycle when the commotion started. He could hear raised voices in the corridor outside their chamber, speaking in the melodic language of the Valtharanes. The door opened, and a group of officials entered, their clothing even more elaborate than the soldiers' armor. They looked angry. One of them, a female with silver markings on her forehead, spoke in perfect English. "You have committed an act of war against the Valtharian Empire. You have destroyed sacred ground during the Crown Princess's birthday celebration. You have endangered the royal family. For these crimes you will be held until your fate is decided." Captain Reynolds tried to explain about the anomaly, about how it was an accident, but the officials didn't seem interested in hearing it. They left, and the door sealed behind them with a sound of finality. That night, Junho couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about how their peaceful mission had turned into a disaster. He thought about Earth, about whether he would ever see it again. He thought about his sister, who had told him not to take this assignment. He should have listened. The next morning brought more officials, more questions, more accusations. The crew was separated and interrogated individually. When it was Junho's turn, he answered honestly about his role as the ship's medic and xenobiologist. The interrogator, a stern male with deep blue markings, seemed particularly interested in his medical knowledge. "You study alien biology?" the interrogator asked. "Yes," Junho replied. "It's necessary for space travel. We need to understand the beings we might encounter." The interrogator made notes on a device that projected information into the air. "And you have medical training?" "I'm a fully certified physician and surgeon. I specialize in cross-species medicine." The interrogator paused, studying him with those strange, beautiful eyes. "Interesting," he said, and nothing more. Junho was returned to the holding chamber with the others. Days passed in this way, each one bleeding into the next. The Valtharanes fed them and provided for their basic needs, but no one would tell them what was going to happen. The crew grew more desperate, more frightened. Some talked of escape, though Junho knew it was hopeless. It was on the 5th day that everything changed. Junho was dozing against the wall when the door opened with more force than usual. A group of guards entered, their expressions urgent. They pointed at Junho. "You!" one said in accented English. "The medic! Come with us now!" His crewmates protested, but the guards were insistent. Junho stood on shaking legs, grabbed his medical kit out of habit, and followed them into the corridor. They moved quickly through the palace, past chambers of impossible beauty and windows that looked out over a city that glowed in the twilight. They brought him to a chamber where the air felt heavy with fear and desperation. Inside, a small figure lay on a bed that seemed to be made of crystallized light. She couldn't have been more than 12 years old by human standards, with skin pale even for a Valtharane's and breathing that came in shallow gasps. A woman sat beside the bed, her hand clutching the child's. When she looked up at Junho, he saw such pain in her eyes that his heart ached in response. She wore a crown of living light, and he knew without being told that this was the queen. "They say you are a healer," she said, her voice breaking. "My daughter is dying, and our physicians cannot save her. I do not care that you are human. I do not care about your ship or your crimes. If you can help her, I will give you anything." Junho approached the bed slowly, his medical training overriding his fear. He looked at the young princess, at the strange pallor of her skin and the way her fingers trembled. Recognition tickled at the back of his mind. He had seen something like this before. Junho knelt beside the princess's bed and opened his medical kit. The queen watched him with desperate eyes, her hand never leaving her daughter's. Around the chamber, Valtharane's physicians stood in small groups, their expressions ranging from hopeful to skeptical. He could feel their stares on his back as he worked. The girl's name was Hana, the queen told him. She was 13 years old and had been sick for weeks. At first, it seemed like a simple fever, nothing to worry about. But she had grown weaker day by day. Her skin had lost its natural shimmer. She could barely keep food down. The royal physicians had tried everything in their considerable medical knowledge, but nothing helped. They feared she had only days left. Junho pulled out his scanner, a portable device designed to read biological data across different species. He had to modify the settings, adjusting for Valtherane's physiology based on the limited data in his database. The scanner hummed softly as it passed over Hana's small form. Numbers and graphs appeared on the screen, painting a picture that made his stomach clench. He recognized the pattern. It was impossible, and yet there it was. The enzyme deficiency, the cellular breakdown, the way her body was essentially poisoning itself. He had written his doctoral thesis on a similar condition in humans. It was rare, genetic, and without treatment, always fatal. "I need to take a blood sample," Junho said to the Queen. She nodded immediately and spoke in Valtherane's to one of the physicians. The doctor approached reluctantly and showed Junho how to safely draw blood from a Valtherane's. Their circulatory system was different from humans, but the principles were similar enough. The blood was silver instead of red, with an opalescent quality that caught the light. Junho placed it in his analyzer and waited for the results. The seconds felt like hours. The Queen sat motionless, her eyes fixed on her daughter's face. Hana stirred slightly, murmuring something in her language, and the Queen leaned close to whisper comfort. The analyzer beeped. Junho studied the results, his mind racing. The genetic markers were there, clear as day. This wasn't just affecting Hana. This was in her bloodline, passed down through generations. It might have been dormant for years, even centuries, but something had triggered its activation now. "Your Majesty," Junho said carefully, "I believe I know what's wrong with your daughter." Every head in the room turned toward him. The Queen stood, her regal bearing returning despite her obvious exhaustion. "Speak," she commanded. Junho explained as simply as he could. Hana's body couldn't produce a specific enzyme needed to break down certain proteins. Without that enzyme, toxic compounds built up in her blood and organs. The condition was genetic, inherited through family lines. In humans, it was called phenylketonuria, though this Valtherane's variant was more aggressive. "Can you cure her?" the Queen asked, and there was such naked hope in her voice that Junho had to look away. "Not cure," he said honestly, "but I can treat it. With the right therapy, she can live a normal life. The treatment would need to be ongoing, but it's manageable." One of the Valtherane's physicians, an older male with golden markings, stepped forward. His tone was sharp. "How can a human possibly understand our biology well enough to make such claims? We have studied the princess for weeks with all our advanced technology." Junho understood the skepticism. He was an alien, a prisoner, and he was claiming he could do what their entire medical establishment couldn't. "Your biology is different from ours," he said, "but the fundamental principles of genetics are universal. I've seen this pattern before. The enzyme deficiency, the protein buildup, the cellular damage. It's the same mechanism, just in a different species." "And if you're wrong," another physician demanded, "if your treatment harms her?" "Then I'll be wrong," Junho said simply. "But right now she's dying. You've said so yourself. What do you have to lose?" The silence that followed was heavy. The Queen looked at her daughter, at the shallow rise and fall of her chest, at the way her skin had lost its glow. When she spoke, her voice was steel. "Do it. Whatever you need, it's yours." The next hours were a blur of activity. Junho sent guards to his crashed ship to retrieve specific equipment from the medical bay. He needed a gene sequencer, a protein synthesizer, and various chemical compounds. The Valtherane's watched with fascination as he assembled what looked like a primitive laboratory in a corner of the royal chamber. The biggest challenge was creating the enzyme replacement therapy. Junho had the knowledge, but he had to adapt it for Valtherane's biology. He worked with the golden-marked physician, whose name was Hyun, combining human medical theory with Valtherane's biological understanding. Despite his initial hostility, Hyun was brilliant, and together they made progress. But there was a problem, a significant one. "The enzyme is unstable," Hyun said, staring at their test results. "It breaks down too quickly in Valtherane's physiology. By the time it reaches the organs, it's useless." Junho rubbed his tired eyes. He had been working for nearly 20 hours straight. "We need a stabilizing agent," he muttered, "something that can protect the enzyme long enough for it to work." "We don't have anything like that," Hyun said. An idea formed in Junho's mind. It was crazy, dangerous, and possibly brilliant. He looked at his own hands, at the very human blood flowing through his veins. Human proteins were different from Valtherane's proteins, but what if that difference was exactly what they needed? "What if we used human cells as a carrier?" he said slowly. Hyun looked at him as if he had suggested they pray to ancient gods. "That's absurd. The rejection response alone would kill her." "Not if we modify them first," Junho argued. He was thinking out loud now, his mind racing through possibilities. "We could use human stem cells as a template, modify them to produce the enzyme, then coat them with Valtherane's proteins to prevent rejection. The human cellular structure might be stable enough to carry the enzyme where it needs to go." "And where do you propose we get these human stem cells?" Hyun asked. Junho met his eyes. "From me?" The room erupted in protests. It was too dangerous, too experimental, too insane. But Junho was already preparing the equipment. If this didn't work, Hana would die anyway. At least this gave her a chance. He drew his own blood, isolated stem cells, and began the modification process. It required precision far beyond what his portable equipment was designed for, but necessity drove innovation. Hyun, despite his reservations, helped guide the Valtherane's specific modifications. The Queen watched in silence as Junho worked. She had given orders that he was to have anything he requested, and no one was to interfere. The other physicians kept their distance, though Junho could feel their judgment. Finally, after 36 hours of continuous work, they had something. The modified cells floated in a clear suspension, each one carrying the enzyme that Hana's body couldn't produce. Junho tested them on Valtherane's tissue samples, watching as they successfully delivered their payload without triggering rejection. "It's ready," he said, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. The Queen looked at the syringe in his hand, at the future of her daughter contained in such a small thing. "If this works," she said quietly, "you will have saved more than just her life. You will have saved our entire bloodline." Junho's hand froze halfway to the IV port. "What do you mean, your entire bloodline?" The Queen's expression was grave. "My brother has begun showing the same symptoms. Milder, but present. This illness is in our blood, passed down through generations. If it has awakened in Hana, it will awaken in all who carry royal blood." The implications hit Junho like a physical blow. This wasn't just about saving one sick child. This was about the survival of an empire's ruling dynasty. The weight of that responsibility settled on his shoulders like lead. "Then we'd better make sure this works," he said, and injected the treatment into Hana's IV. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Hana's breathing changed, deepened. Color began to return to her skin, a faint shimmer that grew stronger by the minute. Her eyes fluttered open, violet and gold and beautiful. "Mother?" she whispered. The Queen collapsed to her knees beside the bed, tears streaming down her face. Around the chamber, physicians stared in disbelief. Hyun looked at the monitoring equipment, at the numbers that showed Hana's body responding to the treatment, and slowly nodded. Impossible, he breathed. But it's working. Junho let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His legs gave out, and he sat down hard on the floor. He had done it. Against all odds, with equipment held together by determination and desperate hope, he had done it. But as the queen held her daughter and wept with relief, Junho realized something. This wasn't over. This was only the beginning. Word of Hannah's miraculous recovery spread through the palace like wildfire. Within hours, Junho found himself at the center of a political storm he hadn't anticipated. The Queen had called an emergency session of the Royal Council, and he stood before them now, exhausted and overwhelmed, trying to explain what he had done. The council chamber was massive, with a ceiling that seemed to stretch into infinity. Hundreds of nobles and advisors filled the tiered seating, all of them staring down at the lone human on the chamber floor. Their eyes ranged from curious to hostile, and Junho felt very small under their collective gaze. At the head of the chamber sat Queen Myung on her throne of crystallized light. Beside her, looking much healthier than she had any right to after being near death just days ago, sat Princess Hannah. The girl watched Junho with undisguised fascination, occasionally whispering to her mother. The queen's brother, Prince Taemin, sat on her other side. He was younger than Myung, perhaps in his 30s by human standards, and he looked troubled. Junho had examined him earlier that morning and confirmed what the queen feared. The same genetic markers were in his blood. He would need treatment too, and soon. The chief advisor, a severe woman named Bora, with silver markings that covered half her face, stood to address the council. Her voice carried through the chamber with practiced authority. This human claims he can treat a genetic condition that has plagued the royal line. He has supposedly cured Princess Hannah using his primitive medicine. Many of you have expressed concern about this development, and rightly so. Junho's stomach tightened. This wasn't going to be a celebration. This was going to be a trial. Bora continued, her tone sharp. We are one of the most advanced civilizations in the known galaxy. Our medical technology is centuries beyond anything Earth has achieved. And yet we are meant to believe that this alien, with his crude equipment and limited understanding, has accomplished what our finest minds could not. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the chamber. Junho saw several nobles nodding vigorously. Furthermore, Bora said, turning to look directly at him, we only have his word that the princess was actually sick with this condition. How do we know he didn't poison her himself, then provide the antidote to gain our trust? His ship did commit an act of war against us. Perhaps this is all part of a larger human plot. The murmurs grew louder, more agitated. Junho felt panic rising in his chest. He tried to speak, to defend himself, but Bora raised a hand for silence. I propose that we reject this human's treatment entirely. We should return to traditional Valtharain's medicine and keep the royal family away from alien contamination. If the princess recovers on her own, we will know his intervention was unnecessary. If she doesn't... Bora paused significantly. Then we will know the truth of her illness. That will kill her, Junho said, his voice cutting through the noise. The chamber fell silent. He knew he was breaking protocol by speaking without permission, but he couldn't stay quiet. If you stop the treatment now, the enzyme deficiency will return. Within days, she'll be as sick as before. Within weeks, she'll be dead. Bora's expression was cold. More threats, human? It's not a threat, it's biology, Junho said, frustration making him bold. Your physicians can verify everything I've told you. They have the test results, the genetic markers, the cellular analysis. This isn't about trust or politics, it's about science. Science that only you understand, another council member called out. How convenient. Physician Hyun stood from his seat in the gallery. As royal physician, he had the right to address the council. I have reviewed the human's work extensively, he said, his voice measured. His analysis is correct. Princess Hana suffers from a hereditary enzyme deficiency. I have confirmed it independently using our own equipment. The treatment he provided is working. Her blood chemistry has normalized, and her symptoms have resolved. For now, Bora countered, we don't know the long-term effects of mixing human and Valtherane's biology. This treatment could cause unforeseen harm. And doing nothing will certainly cause death, Hyun replied firmly. I have seen the progression of this disease. Without treatment, the princess has no future. The debate raged on for hours. Junho stood there, answering questions, defending his work, trying to make them understand. Some council members seemed genuinely interested in the science. Others seemed determined to reject anything that came from an alien, regardless of the evidence. It was Prince Taemin who finally stood and asked for silence. The chamber quieted immediately. I have this same condition, he said, his voice steady despite the gasps that followed his words. The human examined me this morning and found the same genetic markers. I am in the early stages, but I will develop symptoms soon. If we reject his treatment for the princess, we reject it for me as well. The implications hung heavy in the air. Hana was the crown princess, but Taemin was next in line after her. If both of them died from this condition, the royal bloodline would be broken. Queen Miyung rose from her throne. Every eye turned to her. Enough debate, she said, her voice resonating with power. My daughter was dying. Now she lives. That is the only fact that matters. This human has done what our own physicians could not. We should be grateful, not suspicious. Your Majesty, Bora said carefully, I understand your gratitude, but we must consider the larger implications. If we become dependent on human medicine, on this human specifically, we put the Empire in a vulnerable position. We are already vulnerable, the Queen said sharply. We are vulnerable to a genetic disease that could end the royal line. The human has offered us a solution. I intend to accept it. Bora's expression hardened. And what happens when he leaves? When he returns to his people? Will we be left helpless, unable to continue the treatment? It was a good question, and one Junho had been thinking about himself. I can teach your physicians, he said. Hyun has already learned much of the process. With time, I can train others. The treatment doesn't require me specifically. But it does require human cells, Bora pointed out. You said so yourself. You used your own modified stem cells as carriers for the enzyme. Are we to harvest human tissue for our royal family's treatment? How many humans would we need? How would we obtain them? Junho felt the trap closing. She was right. The current treatment protocol relied on human cellular structures. He could provide cells for Hana and Taemin, but if others in the royal line developed symptoms, they would need more donors. It created a dependency that made everyone uncomfortable. I can work on modifying the treatment, Junho said, finding a way to use purely Valtherane's cellular structures. It will take time and research, but it's possible. How much time? Bora demanded. I don't know. Months, maybe years. And in the meantime, our royal family remains dependent on an alien prisoner? The word prisoner stung, even though it was accurate. Junho looked at his hands, at the fingers that had held the syringe that saved Hana's life, and felt the weight of impossible choices. Queen Miyong descended from her throne and walked across the chamber floor until she stood directly in front of Junho. He had to look up to meet her eyes. She was tall, even for a Valtherane's, and her presence was commanding. You saved my daughter's life, she said quietly, though her voice carried through the silent chamber. You did it knowing that we had imprisoned you and your crew. You did it even though we treated you as criminals. Why? Junho thought about the question. He could give the diplomatic answer, talk about building bridges between species and the value of all life. But standing there, looking into the Queen's eyes, he found himself speaking a simpler truth. Because she was sick and I could help, he said. That's what doctors do. It doesn't matter who you are or where you're from. If someone needs help and I can provide it, I do. That's all. Something in the Queen's expression softened. She turned to address the council. This human asks for nothing. He demands nothing. He simply offers to help. How can we, who claim to be civilized, respond with suspicion and rejection? She walked back to her throne, her robes flowing behind her like liquid light. When she sat, she looked regal and terrible and beautiful. I make this decree, she said, her voice echoing through the chamber. The human will continue to treat Princess Hana and Prince Taemin. He will train our physicians in his methods. He and his crew will be given proper quarters and treated as honored guests, not prisoners. And in recognition of his service to the royal bloodline, he will be granted the title of royal physician. The chamber erupted in protests and arguments, but the Queen raised her hand for silence. This is not a debate. This is my will as your Queen. The human has saved my daughter. He has given us hope where there was none. He belongs to this empire now, for as long as his knowledge is needed. Junho felt dizzy. He wasn't sure if he had just been freed or bound in chains of a different kind. The Queen's declaration was generous, but it also made it clear that he wasn't free to leave. His knowledge, his skills, his very presence was now property of the Valtharain's empire. As the council session ended and nobles filed out in animated discussion, Princess Hana approached him. She looked so much healthier than when he'd first seen her skin glowing with its natural shimmer. Thank you, she said in careful English. You saved my life. Junho managed a tired smile. You're welcome, Princess. My mother says you're staying with us now, Hana continued. I'm glad. I want to learn about humans, about Earth. Will you teach me? Looking at her eager expression, at this child who had been dying and now had a future, Junho found he couldn't regret anything. Whatever price he had to pay, it was worth it. The formal ceremony took place 3 weeks after Junho saved Princess Hana's life. He stood in the grand hall of the palace, surrounded by thousands of Valtharain's nobles, dignitaries, and citizens who had come to witness what the Queen called a historic moment. The hall was so vast that he couldn't see the far walls, and the ceiling was open to the sky, where both suns hung like watching eyes. Junho wore clothing provided by the palace staff, a mixture of Valtharain's formal wear adapted for his human frame. He felt ridiculous and uncomfortable, but Captain Reynolds had insisted he play along. His crew was present too, standing in a place of honor near the throne. They looked as bewildered as he felt. Queen Myung sat on her throne with Hana and Taemin on either side. Both of them looked healthy and strong, the treatments working beyond even Junho's hopes. Taemin's symptoms had appeared a week after Hana's recovery, but they had caught them early. The prince had been nothing but gracious about the whole thing, treating Junho with a respect that made him uncomfortable. The ceremony began with traditional Valtharain's music, a sound that resonated in his bones and made the air shimmer. Dancers performed stories of the empire's history, their movements fluid and impossible. Then came speeches from various nobles, praising the Queen's wisdom and the miracle of the princess's recovery. Finally, it was the Queen's turn to speak. She rose from her throne, and the hall fell absolutely silent. When she spoke, her voice was amplified somehow, reaching every corner of the massive space. 3 weeks ago, tragedy struck our empire, she began. Princess Hana, beloved daughter and heir to the throne, fell gravely ill. Our finest physicians tried everything in their power to save her, but they could not. We faced the very real possibility of losing not just a princess, but the future of our royal line. Junho felt the weight of thousands of eyes on him. He tried to stand straight, to look dignified, but he just felt like an awkward human who had stumbled into something far beyond his understanding. In our darkest hour, help came from the most unexpected source, the Queen continued. A human, from a species we barely knew, offered his knowledge and skill without hesitation. Junho, though he and his crew were our prisoners, though he owed us nothing, worked tirelessly to save my daughter, and he succeeded where we had failed. She gestured, and Junho was prompted forward by palace attendants. He walked across the polished floor, his footsteps echoing. When he reached the base of the throne, he bowed as he had been instructed. Junho has not only saved Princess Hana, the Queen said, but has also begun treatment for Prince Taemin, who carries the same genetic condition. He has trained our physicians in new techniques, shared knowledge that spans the bridge between our species. He has proven that the differences between us are smaller than we thought, and that compassion recognizes no borders. The crowd murmured in approval, though Junho could still sense skepticism from some quarters. Not everyone was happy about the Queen's public embrace of human medicine. Therefore, Queen Myung declared, her voice ringing with authority, I make this proclamation before all gathered here and before the Empire itself. Junho, human of Earth, is hereby declared property of the Valtharain's Empire. He is bound to us, as we are bound to him, for the preservation of the royal bloodline and the good of all our people. The words hit Junho like a physical blow. Property. Bound. He had known this was coming, but hearing it declared so formally, before thousands of witnesses, made it real in a way it hadn't been before. He will be given the title of Royal Physician and Special Advisor on Human Medicine, the Queen continued. He will be granted quarters in the palace, access to our finest laboratories, and resources to continue his research. His crew will be released from imprisonment and granted the status of honored ambassadors, free to return to Earth or remain here as they choose. Captain Reynolds had negotiated that part, the crew's freedom in exchange for Junho's service. It was the best deal they could get, though it left a bitter taste in Junho's mouth. But make no mistake, the Queen said, her tone hardening. Junho belongs to this empire now. His knowledge, his skills, his very presence is essential to our future. The human government has demanded his return. I deny that demand. He is ours, and we will not surrender him. The hall erupted in applause and cheers. Junho stood there, numb, as the implications sank in. The Queen had just told Earth that they weren't getting him back. She had declared him property, a resource to be kept and used. It was diplomatic language, dressed up in honor and titles, but the message was clear. He was trapped. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Junho found himself surrounded by nobles wanting to meet the human who had saved the princess. They asked questions, some genuinely curious, others probing for weakness or advantage. He answered as best he could, his mind still reeling from the Queen's declaration. Captain Reynolds found him eventually, pulling him aside to a quiet corner. The captain looked conflicted, guilty, and relieved in equal measure. I'm sorry, Junho, Reynolds said quietly. I tried to negotiate better terms, but the Queen wouldn't budge. It was this, or they would have held all of us indefinitely. I know, Junho said. He did know. Reynolds had done what he could. At least the crew can go home. We don't have to, Reynolds said. Some of us have volunteered to stay if it would help. Show of support from Earth, that kind of thing. Junho shook his head. No, you all should go. Tell Earth what happened. Make sure they know I'm okay. He tried to smile. Well, as okay as someone can be when they've been declared property of an alien empire. Reynolds gripped his shoulder. You're a hero, Junho, on Earth, among the crew, here in this empire. What you did for that girl, it matters. Don't forget that. After Reynolds left, Junho stood alone for a moment, watching the celebration continue around him. Valtharain's nobles danced and talked and celebrated the fact that their princess lived. They were happy. He should be happy too. He had saved a life, Multiple lives. That was what mattered. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he had traded one prison for another. "You look troubled." Princess Hana had appeared beside him, moving with the quiet grace of her people. She looked beautiful in her formal gown, every inch the princess she was meant to be. "I'm fine, Princess," Junho said automatically. "You're a terrible liar," Hana replied with a small smile. "For a doctor, you're very bad at hiding your feelings." "Despite everything," Junho laughed, "I guess I am." Hana was quiet for a moment, looking out at the celebrating crowd. "My mother's declaration bothers you," she said. It wasn't a question. "It's complicated," Junho said carefully. "Because she called you property," Hana said. "I understand. In your culture, all beings should be free, yes? The concept of belonging to someone else is wrong." "Something like that." Hana nodded thoughtfully. "In our culture, belonging is different. When my mother says you belong to us, she doesn't mean you're a slave or a possession. She means you're family. You're part of us now, bound by ties of obligation and honor. You saved my life, so I owe you a life debt. My mother saved your crew, so you owe her service. It's balanced, connected." "But I can't leave," Junho pointed out. "Could you leave if you wanted to?" Hana asked. "Knowing that I need continued treatment? Knowing that my uncle needs your help? Knowing that there might be others in the royal line who develop symptoms? Could you really walk away?" The question hit harder than Junho expected. The truth was, no, he probably couldn't. Even if the Queen released him right now, told him he was free to go, he wouldn't feel right leaving. Not when people needed him. "That's the binding," Hana said softly. "Not chains, but responsibility. You're bound to us by your own nature, by who you are as a healer. My mother just made it official." Junho looked at the young princess with new respect. For someone so young, she had a wisdom that surprised him. "You've been thinking about this a lot." "I have much time to think while I recover," Hana said. "And I think about the human who saved me, about what it cost you. I want to understand." "It cost less than you think," Junho admitted. "I was already far from home. My crew was already in danger. At least this way, some good came from the crash." "But you miss Earth," Hana said. Junho nodded. "I do. I miss my sister. I miss food that doesn't taste strange. I miss understanding everything everyone says without having to think about it." "I can help with the language," Hana offered eagerly. "I'm learning human languages, English, Korean, Mandarin. I find them fascinating. We could practice together." The offer was so genuine, so enthusiastic, that Junho couldn't help but smile. "I'd like that." Prince Taemin joined them, carrying drinks in crystalline glasses. "The hero looks like he needs refreshment," he said, offering one to Junho. "It's Valtharain's wine, but I've had the kitchen staff verify it's safe for human consumption." Junho took it gratefully. "Thank you, Your Highness." "Just Taemin," the prince said. "You're family now, according to my sister's declaration. We don't stand on ceremony with family." The wine was sweet and strong, with an aftertaste like starlight. Junho sipped it and felt some of the tension in his shoulders ease. "I know this isn't what you wanted," Taemin said quietly. "Being trapped here, I mean. But for what it's worth, we're grateful. Not just for the medical care, but for your patience with all of this political nonsense." "It's not nonsense if it keeps you alive," Junho said. Taemin smiled, but there was sadness in it. "My sister told me what you said to her mother. That you helped because you could, because it's what doctors do. That kind of simple goodness is rare, Junho, especially here, where everything is politics and power plays." "I'm not that good," Junho protested. "I'm just a doctor doing his job." "That's what makes it remarkable," Hana said. "You don't see your own value. To you, saving lives is just what you do. but to us, to me, it's everything." Looking at the two of them, healthy and alive when weeks ago they had been dying, Junho felt something shift inside him. Maybe the Queen's declaration wasn't a prison sentence. Maybe it was just a different kind of life. Not the one he had planned, but not a terrible one either. He was needed here. He could do good work. He could make a difference. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to call this place home. 6 months passed in what felt like both an eternity and an instant. Junho had settled into a routine in the palace, though calling it settling felt wrong. Every day brought new challenges, new discoveries, new moments where he felt completely out of his depth. His laboratory was magnificent, far beyond anything he could have accessed on Earth. The Queen had spared no expense, providing equipment that made his portable medical kit look like Stone Age tools. He worked there most days, training Valtherane's physicians in the treatment protocols and researching ways to improve the therapy. The training sessions were exhausting. Physician Hyun had become his closest collaborator, but there were dozens of other medical professionals who needed to learn the procedures. Each one had to understand not just the mechanics of the treatment, but the underlying principles. Junho found himself teaching genetics, cellular biology, and cross-species medical theory to beings who had never considered human biology worth studying. Some of them were eager students. Others remained skeptical, convinced that Valtherane's medicine was superior and that relying on human knowledge was a mistake. Junho tried to bridge the gap, showing them how human and Valtherane's medicine could complement each other, but it wasn't easy. The language lessons with Princess Hana had become a highlight of his days. She was brilliant, picking up concepts with frightening speed. She had already mastered conversational English and was working on Korean. In return, she taught him Valtherane's, correcting his terrible pronunciation with patience and humor. "No," she would say, laughing. "You're saying, 'My head is full of clouds' instead of 'Good morning.' Try again." Junho would try again, mangling the delicate vowel sounds, and Hana would dissolve into giggles. It was hard to believe this was the same girl who had been dying in her bed 6 months ago. The treatment had given her life back, and she lived it with infectious enthusiasm. Through Hana, Junho learned about Valtherane's culture. He learned about their history, their art, their complex social structures. He learned that the royal family had ruled for over 3,000 years, an unbroken line stretching back to the founding of the empire. He learned why the genetic disease was such a threat. Without the royal bloodline, the empire would fracture into competing factions. Civil war would be almost inevitable. No pressure, he thought wryly. Just the fate of an entire civilization depending on his medical knowledge. Prince Taemin had become something like a friend. The prince was kind and thoughtful, with a dry sense of humor that reminded Junho of his sister back on Earth. Taemin was also deeply curious about human culture, asking endless questions about Earth's governments, religions, and social movements. "I find it fascinating that you have so many different systems," Taemin said one evening over dinner. Junho had been invited to the royal family's private dining room, a privilege that still made him nervous. "So many countries, languages, beliefs. How do you function without unified leadership?" "We don't always function well," Junho admitted. "There's a lot of conflict, a lot of disagreement. But there's also diversity of thought, innovation from different perspectives. Sometimes chaos leads to creativity." The Queen, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Perhaps that's why you were able to solve our medical problem when we couldn't. You approach things differently because you come from a different way of thinking." It was one of the few times the Queen had spoken to him directly outside of official business. Junho felt honored and terrified in equal measure. Myung was an intimidating presence, regal and powerful, with eyes that seemed to see through him. But the biggest breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Chief Advisor Bora, who had opposed him so vocally in the council chamber, requested a private meeting. Junho went nervously, expecting another interrogation about his methods. Instead, Bora surprised him. "I owe you an apology," she said without preamble. They stood in her office, a room filled with books and documents that spoke of centuries of accumulated knowledge. "I questioned your motives and your abilities. I was wrong on both counts." Junho didn't know what to say. "Thank you" seemed inadequate. "I was protecting the royal family the only way I knew how," Bora continued, "by being suspicious of outsiders, by questioning everything. But I've watched your work these past months. I've seen how you care for the princess and the prince. You're not trying to gain power or influence. You genuinely just want to help." "That's all I've ever wanted," Junho said. Bora nodded slowly. "I'm beginning to understand that. Human motivations are different from what I expected." She paused, then said, "I have a request. My niece, a minor noble, has been showing symptoms similar to the princess's. I've been hesitant to bring her forward because I didn't trust you. But now, bring her to the laboratory tomorrow," Junho said immediately. "I'll examine her." The niece, a young woman named Yunji, did indeed carry the genetic markers. She was the first case outside the immediate royal family, confirming Junho's fears that the condition was more widespread than they'd thought. He started her on treatment immediately, and within days she showed the same improvement as Hana and Taemin. Word spread quickly. Other noble families, ones related to the royal line through ancient marriages and bloodlines, began coming forward. Some had developed symptoms. Others wanted testing to know if they carried the markers. Junho found himself treating not just the royal family, but an extended network of nobility whose genetic heritage included the dangerous enzyme deficiency. It was overwhelming. He worked 16-hour days, examining patients, preparing treatments, training physicians. He fell into bed exhausted each night and woke to do it again. But he was making a difference, saving lives that would have been lost. The crisis came when supplies began running low. The treatment still required human cellular material as a carrier, and Junho had been donating his own stem cells regularly. But with so many patients now, his donations weren't enough. "We need more human donors," he told Hyun during one of their research sessions. "I can't provide enough cells for everyone who needs treatment." "Where do we get them?" Hyun asked practically. "Earth won't be happy about us harvesting human tissue." Junho had been thinking about this problem for weeks. What if we don't need actual human tissue? What if we can synthesize it? Hyun looked skeptical. "We've tried to create synthetic carriers. They don't work. Because we were trying to make Valtherane's cells do a human job," Junho explained, his mind racing. "But what if we could engineer a hybrid cell? Something that combines the stability of human cellular structure with Valtherane's biochemistry?" It was a long shot, but they worked on it anyway. Weeks turned into months of experiments, failures, and small victories. Junho barely saw sunlight, spending nearly all his time in the laboratory. Hana would visit sometimes, bringing food and forcing him to take breaks. "You work too hard," she scolded him one evening, finding him asleep at his workstation. "Even healers need rest." "Can't rest," Junho mumbled, rubbing his eyes. "Too many people depending on me." "They'll still be depending on you tomorrow," Hana said firmly. "But if you collapse from exhaustion, you won't be able to help anyone. Come on, I'm dragging you to dinner." At dinner that night, sitting with the royal family as if it were the most natural thing in the world, Junho realized how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he had been a prisoner, terrified and alone. Now he sat at the table with people who felt like family, eating food that no longer tasted strange, speaking a language that was becoming comfortable in his mouth. "You look thoughtful," Taemin observed. "Good thoughts or bad?" "Strange thoughts," Junho admitted. "I was just thinking that I'm happy." which is weird, considering I'm technically property of an empire and can never go home. You could go home if you wanted, Queen Myung said quietly. Everyone looked at her in surprise. I would not force you to stay against your will, Junho. If you truly wish to return to Earth, I will arrange it. The offer hung in the air. Junho thought about Earth, about his sister, about the life he had left behind. He thought about walking away from his laboratory, from his patients, from the research that was so close to a breakthrough. He thought about never seeing Hana's smile again, or hearing Taemin's dry jokes, or working alongside Hyun in companionable silence. I appreciate that, Your Majesty, he said slowly, but I think I'm needed here, at least for now. At least until we solve the synthesis problem and your physicians can handle the treatments without me. Myung nodded, and something in her expression softened. Then you stay by choice, not by decree. That is important. It was important. It changed everything, actually. Junho wasn't a prisoner anymore. He was choosing to be here, choosing to help, choosing this strange new life. 2 weeks later, the breakthrough came. He and Hyun successfully synthesized a hybrid cell that carried the enzyme without requiring human tissue donors. The synthetic cells were stable, effective, and could be mass-produced using Valtherane's biotechnology. When the first patient received the new synthetic treatment and responded just as well as those who had received Junho's own cells, the entire laboratory erupted in celebration. Physicians who had been skeptical of human medicine now embraced him, celebrating the collaboration between two species that had created something neither could have achieved alone. That night, there was a celebration in the palace. The Queen formally announced the breakthrough to the court, praising the combined efforts of human and Valtherane's medicine. She gave credit to Hyun and the other physicians, but made it clear that none of it would have been possible without Junho's initial insight. Standing there, accepting congratulations from nobles who had once looked at him with suspicion, Junho felt something he hadn't expected. He felt proud, not just of the medical achievement, but of the bridges he had helped build between two species. Maybe this was where he was meant to be. Maybe his ship hadn't crashed by accident. Maybe this was always his destiny, to be the link between humans and Valtheranes, to show that despite their differences, they could work together and create something beautiful. Princess Hana found him after the celebration, her eyes shining. You did it, she said. You saved not just me, but everyone, the entire bloodline. We did it, Junho corrected. All of us together. Hana smiled and took his hand, a gesture of affection that would have been scandalous months ago, but now felt natural. My mother was right, she said. You belong with us, not because we claimed you, but because you chose us. Looking at her, at this girl he had saved who had become like a sister to him, Junho knew she was right. He had found where he belonged. The celebration banquet was the largest gathering Junho had attended since the formal declaration ceremony. The grand hall blazed with light from thousands of floating lamps, and tables groaned under the weight of elaborate dishes. Nobles from across the empire had traveled to the capital to witness the announcement of the synthetic treatment breakthrough. Junho sat at the high table, an honor that still made him uncomfortable. To his left was physician Hyun, looking more relaxed than Junho had ever seen him. To his right was Princess Hana, who kept pointing out various nobles and whispering gossip about them that made him try not to laugh. See that one with the purple markings? She murmured. Duke Sang-hoon. He once proposed marriage to my mother by sending her 300 singing birds. They escaped and nested in the palace towers. We still find them sometimes. Junho bit back a smile. I take it she said no? She said if she wanted that much noise, she'd hire an orchestra, Hana replied with barely contained giggles. The queen sat at the center of the high table, looking regal in formal robes that seemed to be made of liquid starlight. Prince Taman sat beside her, engaging in conversation with various nobles who approached to pay their respects. The mood was celebratory, relieved. The crisis that had threatened the royal bloodline was finally resolved. But something felt off to Junho. He couldn't put his finger on what exactly, just a prickling at the back of his neck, an instinct that said danger. He scanned the crowd, looking for anything unusual, but saw only celebrating nobles enjoying their feast. "You're doing it again," Hana said, nudging him gently. "That thing where you look worried even when everything's fine." "Sorry," Junho said. "Just tired, I guess." The servants brought out the next course, a dish that involved crystallized fruits arranged in complex patterns. Junho had learned to eat Valtharain's food without thinking too hard about what it was. Some things were better left mysterious. A servant approached to refill his drink, a young male with nervous hands. As he poured, he leaned close and whispered in broken English, "Don't drink. Danger." Before Junho could react, the servant had moved on to the next guest, his expression neutral. Junho stared at his glass, his heart suddenly pounding. He looked around to see if anyone else had heard, but the noise of the celebration covered everything. Was it a real warning or some kind of test? Or paranoia brought on by exhaustion? He set the glass down carefully, not drinking. Better safe than sorry. The evening continued. Speeches were given, praising the medical breakthrough and the cooperation between species. The Queen spoke about the future, about expanded research partnerships and cultural exchanges. It was all very diplomatic and hopeful. Then the attack came. It happened so fast that Junho's human reflexes couldn't follow it. One moment, a noble was approaching the high table with a gift for the Queen. The next moment, he had drawn a blade from inside the gift box and was lunging toward Junho. The assassin moved with inhuman speed, but Taman was faster. The prince threw himself sideways, intercepting the blade meant for Junho's throat. The weapon struck Taman in the chest with a sound like breaking glass. Chaos erupted. Guards swarmed forward. Nobles screamed and scattered. The assassin was subdued within seconds, but the damage was done. Prince Taman collapsed, silver blood spreading across his formal robes. Junho's medical training kicked in instantly. He was on his knees beside Taman before his mind caught up with his body. The wound was deep, the blade still embedded in the prince's chest. Around him, guards shouted orders and dragged the assassin away. "Get him to the laboratory," Junho ordered. "Now!" They carried Taman through the palace at a run. Hana and the Queen followed, both pale with shock. Junho's mind raced ahead, cataloging what he would need, what procedures might save the prince's life. In the laboratory, he worked with frantic efficiency. Hyun appeared at his side without being called, anticipating what was needed. Together, they stabilized Taman, but the prince was fading fast. "The blade was poisoned," Hyun said, reading the blood analysis. "I don't recognize the compound." Junho studied the data, his enhanced understanding of both human and Valtharain's biology giving him an advantage. The poison was organic, designed to shut down cellular function rapidly. It was sophisticated, clearly custom-made for Valtharain's physiology. But the creator had made one mistake. They had designed it for normal Valtharain's biology, not accounting for the enzyme treatments Taman had been receiving. The human-inspired cellular modifications gave Junho an opening, a weakness he could exploit. "I need activated charcoal synthetic enzyme carriers and chelating agents," he said rapidly. "And prepare a full blood transfusion." "Will it work?" the Queen asked from where she stood at the laboratory entrance. Her voice was steady, but Junho could see the terror in her eyes. "I don't know," Junho admitted. "This poison is nothing like anything I've studied, but it's organic, which means it can be broken down. The enzyme carriers might be able to absorb it, neutralize it before it reaches vital organs. It was a desperate plan, improvised and untested. But Taemin was dying. His life measured in minutes now. They had no time for careful experimentation. Junho worked with Hyun, synthesizing a counteragent using principles from both human toxicology and Valtherane's biochemistry. The synthetic cells they had developed for the genetic treatment became the basis for the antidote. If they could get the cells to target and absorb the poison molecules— "It's ready," Hyun said, holding up a syringe. Junho injected it directly into Taemin's bloodstream, then they started the transfusion. All they could do now was wait and hope. Long minutes passed. The queen stood motionless, one hand gripping her daughter's shoulder. Hana had tears streaming down her face. The laboratory was silent except for the soft beeping of medical equipment. Then, gradually, Taemin's vital signs began to stabilize. The poison levels in his blood started dropping. Color returned to his skin. His breathing deepened and steadied. "It's working," Hyun breathed. Junho didn't let himself relax until Taemin's eyes fluttered open. The prince looked confused, disoriented, but alive. So beautifully, wonderfully alive. "Did I miss dessert?" Taemin asked weakly. The queen made a sound between a laugh and a sob. She moved to her brother's side, taking his hand gently. "You foolish, brave, wonderful man," she said, her voice breaking. "The human was in danger," Taemin said simply. "I couldn't let him die. He's family." Those words hit Junho harder than he expected. Family. This alien prince had taken a poisoned blade for him, had been willing to die for him, because he considered him family. "Thank you," Junho managed, his voice rough. "Thank you for saving my life." "Now we're even," Taemin replied with a weak smile. "You saved mine first." Later, after Taemin had been moved to a recovery room and was sleeping peacefully, the queen summoned her security forces. The investigation had already begun. The assassin was being interrogated, and what they learned was troubling. It wasn't a lone attack. It was part of a larger conspiracy. Chief Advisor Bora arrived at the laboratory, her expression grim. "We've identified 5 other conspirators so far," she reported. "All nobles with ties to the old conservative faction. They've been planning this for months." "Planning what?" Junho asked. "To kill me?" "To kill you, and let the royal family die from the genetic disease," Bora said bluntly. "They believe the empire would be better off as a republic, ruled by elected officials rather than a hereditary monarchy. Your treatment protocols threatened their plans by ensuring the royal line would continue." The implications were staggering. These nobles had been willing to let innocent people die, including children, for political ideology. They had sabotaged treatment supplies, spread rumors about human medicine being dangerous, and finally attempted assassination when their subtler methods failed. "They poisoned the drinks at the banquet too," Bora continued. "The servant who warned you was working with us. We had suspected something was wrong and placed our own people among the serving staff. The poison in the drinks was slower acting, meant to make it look like the treatment itself was harmful." Junho felt sick. If he had drunk from that glass, he would be dead or dying now. The conspiracy had been thorough, targeting him from multiple angles. The arrests continued through the night. Guards swept through the palace and the city, bringing in suspected conspirators. By morning, they had detained over 30 nobles, along with various servants and minor officials who had been part of the plot. The trials were swift by Valtherane's standards, though they took weeks by human measure. Junho was called to testify about the poison, explaining how it had been designed to target his specific cellular modifications. The evidence was damning. The conspirators had not only attempted murder, but had committed treason against the crown. The sentences were harsh. The leaders of the conspiracy were exiled to remote colonies, stripped of titles and wealth. Others received prison terms or forced labor assignments. The assassin who had actually wielded the blade was executed, the only death penalty issued. Junho struggled with that last one. He had never believed in capital punishment, even for attempted murder, but he was learning that Valtherain's justice operated under different principles. The assassin had attacked during a sacred ceremony, had threatened the royal family, and had shown no remorse. Under Valtherain's law, such crimes demanded the ultimate penalty. "You don't have to agree with our laws," the Queen told him when he expressed his discomfort. "You're human. Your people have different values. But you do need to understand that we cannot show weakness when someone threatens the stability of the Empire. That assassin's death prevents future attacks by showing that such actions have consequences." It was a pragmatic view, one Junho couldn't fully embrace, but had to accept. This wasn't Earth. These weren't his laws to change. The conspiracy's exposure had an unexpected effect. The nobles who had been skeptical of Junho now rallied around him. He had been targeted by traitors, which meant the traitors saw him as a threat. In the strange logic of palace politics, this made him trustworthy, the enemy of their enemies, and all that. Chief Advisor Bora became one of his strongest advocates. She had been horrified to discover how deep the conspiracy ran, how many people she had trusted were part of it. Her guilt drove her to ensure that Junho received every protection, every resource he might need. "I should have seen it sooner," she told him during one of their meetings. "The signs were there. Nobles asking too many questions about your work, attempting to access your laboratory, spreading doubts about the treatment. I dismissed it as normal political maneuvering." "You couldn't have known," Junho said. "I didn't see it either." "But it's my job to see these things," Bora insisted. "I'm supposed to protect the royal family and the Empire. I failed." She hadn't failed, not really. The conspiracy had been stopped, the royal family was safe, and Junho was alive. But he understood her guilt. It was the same guilt he felt every time he lost a patient despite his best efforts. The burden of responsibility never got easier to carry. Prince Taemin's recovery was remarkable. Within weeks, he was back on his feet, joking about his new scar and telling embellished stories about his heroic sacrifice. But in quiet moments, Junho saw how the experience had changed him. There was a new seriousness in Taemin's eyes, a recognition of mortality that hadn't been there before. "I came very close to dying," Taemin said to him one evening as they sat in the palace gardens. "I felt it, the poison shutting down my body. I thought that was the end." "I'm sorry you had to go through that," Junho said. "Don't be," Taemin replied. "It taught me something important. Life is fragile, even with all our technology and medicine. What matters is what we do with the time we have. You taught me that, actually. You who save lives every day, who sees that fragility constantly." Junho looked at the alien prince, at this being from a species humanity had barely known existed a year ago, and saw a friend. A real friend who had been willing to die for him. "Thank you," Junho said simply. "For everything." Taemin smiled. "Your family, Junho. We protect our family." That word again. Family. It kept coming up, and each time it did, Junho felt his connection to this place, these people, growing stronger. He had come here as a prisoner, stayed as a physician, and somehow become something more. He had become part of something larger than himself, part of a family that spanned species and stars. 1 year after the crash that changed everything, Junho stood on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens and watched the sunrise. Both suns, actually, rising in sequence, painting the sky in colors that didn't exist on Earth. He had learned to find beauty in these alien dawns, in these strange and wonderful sights that had become familiar. His laboratory had grown into something beyond his wildest dreams. What had started as a desperate attempt to save one sick child now occupied an entire wing of the palace. Dozens of physicians trained there, learning the combined techniques of human and Valtherane's medicine. They treated not just the genetic disease, but explored other areas where the two species' knowledge could complement each other. The synthetic treatment was now standard protocol throughout the Empire. Over 200 members of the extended royal family and nobility had been identified with the genetic markers and placed on preventive therapy. Because of Junho's work, not a single one had died. An entire bloodline had been saved from extinction. But the real breakthrough had come 3 months ago. A delegation from Earth had finally arrived, sent to negotiate for Junho's return and establish formal diplomatic relations with the Valtherian Empire. Among them was his sister, Mina. Junho had cried when he saw her. He wasn't ashamed to admit it. They had embraced for long minutes, both of them talking over each other, trying to fit a year's worth of separation into a few moments. "You look different," Mina had said, holding him at arm's length to study his face. "Older, but happy." "I am happy," Junho had admitted, surprising himself with the truth of it. "This place, these people, they've become important to me." The negotiations had been complex. Earth wanted Junho back. The Valtheranes wanted him to stay. Both sides had valid claims, valid needs. For weeks, diplomats argued about jurisdiction, obligations, and the rights of citizens versus the needs of empires. Junho had listened to it all with growing frustration. They talked about him like he was an object, a resource to be allocated rather than a person with his own desires. Finally, he had demanded to address both negotiating teams. "I'm not a possession," he had told them bluntly. "Not Earth's, not the Valtheranes. I'm a human being with the right to choose where I live and what I do with my life. So here's what I choose. I'm staying with the Valtheranes, but as a voluntary advisor and cultural ambassador, not as property or a prisoner. I want the freedom to visit Earth regularly, to maintain ties with my family and my home. And I want this arrangement to be the foundation for a formal alliance between Earth and the Valtheranes Empire." The room had erupted in debate, but the seed was planted. Over the following weeks, a framework had been negotiated. Junho would remain with the Valtheranes as the director of the new Xenomedical Institute, a position that carried diplomatic status and guaranteed rights. He would have freedom of movement, able to travel to Earth whenever he wished. In exchange, he would facilitate medical and cultural exchanges between the two species. But more than that, his unique position would serve as the foundation for a broader alliance. The agreement outlined trade partnerships, scientific collaboration, and mutual defense pacts. Earth gained access to Valtherane's technology and knowledge. The Valtheranes gained Earth's diverse perspective and innovative problem-solving approaches. It was everything Junho had hoped for and more. "Lost in thought again?" Princess Hana's voice broke through his reverie. She had a habit of sneaking up on him, moving with that natural grace all Valtheranes possessed. "Good thoughts this time," Junho assured her. "Just thinking about how far we've come." Hana joined him at the railing, looking out over the gardens. She had grown in the past year. Not just physically, but in confidence and wisdom. She carried herself like the future queen she would become, but she had never lost her warmth or her curiosity about everything around her. "Today's a big day," she said. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified," Junho admitted. Today was the grand opening of the Xenomedical Institute. Dignitaries from across the Empire would attend, along with the Earth delegation. The building itself was a marvel of architecture, designed to accommodate both human and Valtheranes researchers. It represented the future, a place where two species would work side by side, learning from each other. More importantly, the first class of students would arrive today. Half of them were Valtheranes, young physicians eager to learn these new techniques. The other half were human, volunteers who had traveled from Earth to study here. Junho would be responsible for teaching all of them, for ensuring that the knowledge he had discovered was passed on to the next generation. You'll be wonderful, Hana said confidently. You've taught me. You've taught our physicians. Teaching students will be easy. Junho wasn't so sure about that, but he appreciated her faith in him. The ceremony began at midday. The Institute's great hall was packed with people from two worlds, mingling in a way that would have been unthinkable a year ago. Junho saw his crewmates from the crashed ship, most of whom had returned to Earth but had come back for this occasion. He saw Physician Hyun, who would serve as the Institute's deputy director. He saw Chief Advisor Bora, who had become one of the Institute's strongest political supporters. And he saw his sister Mina sitting in the front row with tears already forming in her eyes. She had been offered a position at the Institute as a cultural liaison, and she had accepted. She would be staying on the Valtharain's homeworld at least for a few years. Junho would have family here, real family, and the thought filled him with joy. Queen Myung stood to give the opening address. She spoke about the past year, about how close they had come to losing everything, and about the human who had saved them. She spoke about the conspiracy that had tried to destroy these bridges between species, and how that failure had only made the bridges stronger. When Junho's ship crashed into our palace, the Queen said, we thought it was an act of war. We imprisoned him and his crew. We treated them as enemies. But Junho showed us a different path. He showed us that reaching across the divide between species, between cultures, between ways of thinking, can create something stronger than either could build alone. She turned to look directly at Junho. I once declared that the human belonged to us. I was wrong. He doesn't belong to us. He belongs with us. And through him, so do all humans who seek peace, knowledge, and mutual understanding. The hall erupted in applause. Junho felt his face heat with embarrassment, but also with pride. The Queen's revised declaration would be recorded in the Imperial Archives, replacing the original. It was a symbolic gesture, but symbols mattered. Then it was Junho's turn to speak. He stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, human and Valtharains alike. He had prepared a speech, something formal and diplomatic, but looking at all those expectant eyes, he decided to speak from the heart instead. A year ago I was terrified, he began. My ship had crashed, my crew was imprisoned, and I was alone on an alien world. I thought my life was over. But then a dying child needed help. And I did what doctors do. I helped. That's all. It wasn't heroic or special. It was just the right thing to do. He paused, gathering his thoughts. What happened after that, though? That was special. The Valtharains didn't just accept my help and send me away. They wanted to learn. They wanted to understand. Physician Hyun, who had every reason to doubt me, worked alongside me until we solved problems neither of us could have solved alone. Princess Hana taught me your language and your culture with endless patience. Prince Taemin literally took a blade meant for me, willing to die to protect someone from another world. Junho felt emotion threatening to overwhelm him, but he pushed through. This institute represents what we can accomplish when we stop seeing each other as aliens and start seeing each other as colleagues, as friends, as family. The students who will study here will learn medicine, yes. But more importantly, they'll learn that our differences make us stronger, not weaker. They'll learn that compassion recognizes no borders, no species boundaries. They'll carry that knowledge back to their worlds and spread it further. He looked at the Queen, at Hana and Taemin, at all the Valtharains who had become so important to him. Then he looked at Mina and his former crewmates, at the humans who had traveled so far to be here. Earth and the Valtharains' empire are different in countless ways, he continued. We look different, think different, have different histories and values. But we're not so different that we can't understand each other. We're not so different that we can't learn from each other. And we're definitely not so different that we can't care about each other. He smiled. feeling more certain of his words than he'd felt about anything in his life. This institute is just the beginning. It's a place where two species will work together, learn together, and build a future together. That's the real miracle. Not that a human saved a Valtharain's princess, but that we discovered we can save each other. That we're better together than we ever were apart. The applause was deafening. Junho stepped down from the podium, and immediately Hana was there, hugging him tightly. Then Taemin, then Hyun, then Mina. He was surrounded by people from two worlds, all of them celebrating this moment, this promise of a better future. The rest of the day was a blur of tours, introductions, and celebrations. The students arrived, wide-eyed and excited, ready to begin their studies. Junho met each one personally, human and Valtharains alike, trying to remember names and faces. They would be his responsibility now, these young people who would carry forward the work he had started. As evening fell and the formal ceremonies ended, Junho found himself back in the palace gardens with Hana. They sat by a fountain that played with water and light, creating patterns that seemed alive. "Are you happy?" Hana asked. "Truly." Junho thought about the question. Was he happy? A year ago, he had been a doctor on a diplomatic mission, living a carefully planned life. Now he was the director of an institute that didn't exist yet, building bridges between species, teaching students from two worlds. His life had become infinitely more complicated. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm happy. This is where I'm supposed to be. This is what I'm supposed to do." Hana smiled, that bright smile that had been his first reward for saving her life. "Good. Because we're not letting you go. You're stuck with us now, Junho. Forever." "Forever is a long time," Junho teased. "Then we'd better make it count," Hana replied. Later that night, Junho stood in his quarters at the institute, looking out at the city lights. Tomorrow, the real work would begin. Students to teach, research to conduct, two species to bring together. It was daunting and exciting and terrifying all at once. His communicator chimed. A message from Earth, from the medical school where he had trained. They wanted to know if he would consider teaching a seminar remotely, sharing what he had learned about cross-species medicine. Junho smiled and typed his acceptance. This was how it would work. Knowledge flowing both directions, each world learning from the other. Another message. This one from a minor noble family requesting treatment for their son, who had just been diagnosed with the genetic markers. Junho made a note to schedule the appointment. This was the price of success, an endless stream of people who needed help. But that was okay. Helping people was what he did. A third message from Taemin was just a stupid joke about human anatomy. Junho laughed and sent back an equally stupid joke about Valtharain's biology. This was friendship across species, ridiculous and wonderful. A final message from his sister. "Proud of you, little brother. Mom and Dad would be proud, too." That one made him tear up a little. His parents had died when he was young, but he liked to think they would approve of what he was doing. He looked at the stars through his window, at the vast universe that suddenly seemed a little smaller, a little more connected. Somewhere out there was Earth, his first home. Here was the Valtharain's homeworld, his second home. And stretching between them, bridges of knowledge and friendship that he had helped build. His ship had crashed a year ago, an accident that had seemed like a disaster. But maybe it wasn't an accident. Maybe it was fate, destiny, or just incredible luck. Whatever it was, it had brought him here, to this moment, to this life. He had saved a royal bloodline. In return, they had given him a purpose larger than himself. They had given him a family that spanned the stars. They had given him a future where anything seemed possible. Junho looked at his reflection in the window, at the human doctor who had become a bridge between worlds, and smiled. This was just the beginning. The real adventure was still ahead, and he couldn't wait to see where it led. Tomorrow he would teach his first class at the Xeno Medical Institute. He would help his students understand that medicine wasn't just about treating disease, it was about connecting with others, understanding them, caring for them. Whether those others were human or Valtharanes or any of the countless species they had yet to meet didn't matter. What mattered was the connection, the reaching across divides, the willingness to help even when it was hard, even when it was scary, even when you were far from home. That was the human spirit. That was what made humanity special, not physical strength or advanced technology, but the simple, stubborn insistence on caring about others. And now that spirit would spread to the stars, carried by students who would teach it to their own people, creating ripples that would touch worlds yet unknown. Junho turned away from the window and prepared for bed. Tomorrow would be challenging and exhausting and probably frustrating, but it would also be meaningful, purposeful, important. He had found his place in the universe. He had found his family among the stars, and he had helped show two species that the things that united them were stronger than the things that divided them. The human had saved the royal bloodline. In return, the royal bloodline had saved him, giving him something he hadn't even known he needed, a home where he truly belonged, a purpose that filled him with joy, and a family that he would protect with everything he had. As sleep claimed him, Junho's last thought was simple and profound. He wouldn't change a thing. Every struggle, every fear, every moment of doubt had led him here, and here was exactly where he was meant to be. The human belonged with them, and they belonged with him. Together, they would build a future that neither species could have imagined alone. And that future started tomorrow.